This video is to go through 16.3 work together. There are 4 steps in this problem. The directions say the following list of accounts is taken from Superior Corporation's adjusted trial balance. For each account that appears on the balance sheet, you're going to indicate if the account should appear in the current asset section, the plant asset section, the current liability section, the long-term liability section, or the stockholders equity section. For any accounts that do not appear on the balance sheet, please select not on balance sheet. I would suggest that you have your book open to help you through this step. Okay, so we are going to start at cash, and we are going to mark that as a current asset. Remember, a current asset is anything that we are going to use up or turn into cash within a year. These two are already cash, so they are a current asset. Same with accounts receivable. Allowance for uncollectible accounts, that is going to be a contra account to our accounts receivable. Our merchandise inventory, supplies office, supplies store, prepaid insurance, notes receivable, and interest receivable. Those should be all of our current assets. Okay, next we're going to be doing our plant assets. So our plant assets are going to be our office equipment, and then also the contra account, accumulated depreciation office equipment. Our store equipment and the contra account to store equipment would be our accumulated depreciation store equipment. Those are going to be our plant assets. Remember, plant assets are anything that anything that you're going to hold on to for longer than a year. All right, next we're going to look at our current liabilities. So kind of like our current assets, current liabilities are something that we plan to pay off within a year. So let's go ahead and mark down. We're in our third column for our current liabilities. So we're going to have accounts payable, sales tax payable, employee income tax payable, Social Security tax payable, Medicare tax payable, health insurance premiums payable, retirement benefits payable, unemployment tax payable, federal and state, our federal income tax payable, and our dividends payable. Now, if we look on our list here, we do not have any long-term liabilities, so we won't have anything marked in this fourth column. Okay, next we're going to be looking at our stockholders equity. Our stockholders equity is the fifth column here. We're going to list our capital stock and our retained earnings. Now, once we get to our dividends, these are all things that are not going to be listed on our balance sheet. These are things that are listed in other locations. So I can go down, I am going to read through them as I go through, but none of these expenses are going to be listed, so they're all not on our balance sheet. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and say grade step 1. And next step. Okay, on my next step, it says the amounts for the balance sheet are obtained from which source, and we're going to check all that apply. So a lot of the information that we are going to get we're going to take from is going to be our adjusted trial balance. However, if you remember our stockholders equity section, that's going to come off of our statement of stockholders equity. An assets related contra account balance is not affected by, added to, or deducted. Hopefully you remember that this is going to be deducted from the assets account balance to determine the book value. So to figure out book value, we take asset minus the contra account. Of the following, which amount should receive a double rule? And it says check all that apply. So remember, the double rule just means the double line underneath it. And that double rule means that those accounts are in balance or those things equal. So what we should be looking at is our total assets and our total liabilities and stockholders' equity. These two numbers should be in balance, should equal, and once they equal, we would show that by putting a double rule underneath. Next question is, of the following, which amount should be equal? And we kind of just answered that here. So what should be equal is our total assets and our total liabilities and stockholders' equity. I'm going to grade step 2 and next step. Okay, now it says the adjusted trial balance and statement of stockholders' equity of Superior Corporation for the year ended December 31st of the current year can be found in question assets. We're going to prepare the asset section of the balance sheet, including the heading. We're going to enter the current year as 20-. It says do not abbreviate the month. The valid values for the text entry cells in the first column can be found in the text selection list tab of question assets. There may be some values that are not required. Any necessary colons are provided for you. So we're going to start with our heading. Our heading always answers who, what, and when. So who is Superior Corporation? Our what, we are creating a balance sheet. And our when, remember our when for this is just the specific date. We are just showing on this date the balance in those accounts. Okay, next we're going to start with our assets section. So I'm going to label that as assets. And we actually have two sections underneath our assets. We're going to have our current assets first. Okay, and they have those listed, and we are simply going to put in those numbers. So I'm actually going to unpin this and scroll this down to make it easier for me to copy in my numbers. So I would say the big thing here is just making sure that we are going to be copying in the correct numbers. So we have 43,355, oops, see, 355.47. Our petty cash is 200. Our accounts receivable is 16,305.45. And then here we need to put into a label. Now notice they do have this extra tab here that says text selection list. So this is kind of like a word bank that we might need to fill in. So all we're looking for here is this should say less. Okay, and then we have our allowance balance of 2,484.22. And now we are going to subtract those two to find our book value of our accounts receivable. Okay, so that'll be 13,821.23. Our merchandise inventory, supplies office, supplies store, prepaid insurance, notes receivable, interest receivable. So those are all of our total current or our current assets. So now we're going to do that. We're going to total our current assets. And I'm going to add up that whole column. Okay, the total that I got was 147,000, sorry, 542.97. Okay, now I'm going to move on to my plant assets. So I'm going to put in that label of plant assets. Okay, and I have my office equipment of 19,916.14. Same thing like I did up here. I'm going to less my contra account, and my contra account is 12,436.2. I'm going to go ahead and subtract those to get my book value. My book value then is 7,479.94. Okay, then I have my store equipment. Again, I'm going to less my contra account. I'm going to subtract those two to find my book value. And I got 30,692.49. And then I'm going to add those two plant assets together to get my total plant assets. And I'm going to label that as total plant assets. Okay, next thing I'm going to do then is I'm going to add my current and my plant to get my total assets. So I'm going to put that label in. And I get my new total assets as 185,715.4. Now, what I don't really like about this is we do need to grade step 3 before we can go on. And there's no really way then of checking this number. If we were able to complete our whole balance sheet, we would be able to check to make sure that our total assets equals our total liabilities plus owner's equity. In this case, we can't. So you might want to check your math just to make sure that you are good. You're going to grade step 3. And then you're going to go on to our liabilities and our equity section. Okay, we're going to put in our heading. And then we're going to put in current liabilities. Now, I know we don't have any long-term liabilities, but we're still going to label this as current. Now, what I'm going to actually do, since I'm running out of time for my video, is I'm going to pause and I'm just going to go ahead and fill in all of those numbers. Now that I have my numbers filled in, I'm going to label this as total liabilities, and I'm going to add up and put my total here. Okay, for my total, I got 26783.20. I'm now going to move on to my stockholders equity section. So I'm going to put in that label, and I'm going to fill in my capital stock and my retained earnings. Now, what's important here is that you don't take that information off your adjusted trial balance. You do need to take that off your statement of stockholders equity. So when I look here, here is going to be my capital stock number. And here is going to be my retained earnings. This is very, very important. I'm going to put in my label of total stockholders equity, and I'm going to put that total here. It should simply be the same number then off of my statement of stockholders equity. Okay, now I'm going to add my liabilities together in my stockholders equity, and I'm going to label this as total liabilities and stockholders equity. Okay, I'm going to put in that number of 185,715.4. We want to make sure that that equals what we have for total assets. If those two numbers do not equal, we have a problem. If they don't equal, I would say the number one place to check is going to be here, and make sure that you took your capital stock and your retained earnings off of your statement of stockholders equity. I'm going to grade my final step, and we should be good. You can now continue on to the 16.3 on your own.